Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, folks. The one and only the Girl Economist come to you on this edition of Rogue News. We have with us Matthew Ehret of the Geostrategic Hour. You can check out Matt's work over at his Substack. Go there, subscribe to his Substack. Amazing, amazing analysis you will find there and nowhere else. And also check out the risingtidefoundation.net as well as canadianpatriot.com. Those are two other sites that Matthew's on, especially the risingtidefoundation.net. That is an amazing, that I call that the modern Library of Alexandria. There is a great deal of learning that you can do over there. So go check that out. And also canadianpatriot.com, where Matt breaks down the entire geopolitical, geoeconomic play. And with that being said, Matt, what's going on, buddy? How are you? And belated Canada Day.
Yeah, right, eh? Canada Day. Yeah, basically anytime there's somebody with a maple leaf on their face, I try not to make eye contact. That being said, it's not really, I mean, that was on July 1st. And today I was hoping, since we have Canada Day on July 1st, that just happened, we have Independence Day on July 4th. And additionally, there's this weird thing called the European Union that had one of they celebrated one of their biggest milestones towards achieving the European Union on July 1st as well, with the creation of the Merger Treaty of 1967. That sort of really streamlined everything into congealing into this like nasty behemoth that we know of today. I figured, this little trifecta of celebrations, so-called, would be something I'd want to treat today for the audience and really, hopefully, showcase and help people appreciate what the United States was intended to be, why it didn't yet achieve the goals that were set out by the founding fathers, why that was sabotaged. Because also just for all the haters out there, to get across that there's something a lot more beautiful to the origins of the United States. And there's a reason why me as a Canadian, and I'm in a weird situation in some ways, being a Canadian conspiracy theorist unapologetically, who also loves the United States. That's a rare thing. And being in Montreal, which is a little bit of a quasi British, European, American hybrid culture. It's a weird synthesis of different civilizations of the Atlantic. I figured it would maybe give me a perspective that I could share with other people and how to approach and why I see the United States and the world the way I do. On the first point of Europe, the Jesuit Pope, I was struck by the fact that just a couple of weeks ago, you guys probably saw this, right?
Yeah,
he put Robert Schumann on the fast track to sainthood. Robert Schumann. I'm not talking about the musician, by the way. He's a good musician. That's a good musician. This is the Robert Schumann who worked with the fascist Pétain government of France. That was a Nazi collaborator. And he's the founding father, along with Winston Churchill, of the European Union. And Pope Francis's logic was, well, the European Union's existence is a miracle. It's survived so many times, so that's a miracle. So that's sufficient to satisfy the 3 miracle limit that would, give somebody sainthood.
That's it. That makes perfect sense, man. And, I'm glad you touched base upon the 67 agreement that kind of congealed what we know as this rotting pustule of a mess known as the European Union. But also pretty interesting is this. In 1968, something very key and profound happened in the economic world, and that was when J.P. Morgan created a company called Euroclear. And Euroclear became the clearinghouse for many of the early bonds that would eventually help to create and fund and bring about the financial creation of the European Union. Euroclear still exists today, last I checked, and what they're used currently is basically to hide all the dumped dollars that are coming out of Saudi Arabia, that are coming out of China, that are coming out of Russia, that are coming out of large institutions. They are dumped in Euroclear today. And Euroclear is a major node for a lot of the off-books bond sales and bond issuances. And they are active currently in 96 countries. So they're a very integral financial part of the Eurozone or the European Union, without which the EU would have never came to be.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah. And it ties in, I think, to anybody who would be attempting to make proper sense of their recent history, and by recent, I'm talking like the last 300-400 years, okay, needs to have that in mind, that there is a conspiratorial aspect. The idea of a deep state is not specifically an American phenomenon. It's an internationally extended supranational phenomenon with different aspects to it. It has intelligence aspects. It has financial warfare aspects. It has many, many things. Military is just one minor, but I mean, it's important, but it's one of many aspects of what has been not just a new problem in the world. It has been a problem going back a very long time, as anybody listening to our show regularly knows. And before I jump into this, because again, I'm going to treat, again, the European Union in one way, but I really want to get across a new idea and understanding of what the United States is and was. And it's a weird time because it feels weird for a lot of people to celebrate Independence Day when the United States is not feeling very independent right now, right? It's a bit of a shit show. So we're going to look at Canada, the United States, a bit of Europe. And I want people to hold in mind what was discussed last week. This is sort of a continuation of our discussion in last Tuesday's episode. Maybe we can put it in the description box for anybody who has not seen that, where we discussed the what is the international rules-based order versus the multipolar alliance, which has founded itself upon the principles of the United Nations Charter. That's what Putin and Xi Jinping have constantly repeated, that any type of international law has to be founded upon that. And in last week's episode, we went through some of the battles between the forces of patriotic nationalists around the world, including Franklin Roosevelt, who led the charge to try to break the system of unipolarism back in the 1930s and 40s, when they crafted the foundations of the post-war age. We also looked at why that was sabotaged, how that was dismantled by FDR's death and the takeover of U.S. foreign policy and internal policy, and a lot of other assassinations internationally. But we also looked at how the UN Charter, when you really, really look at that battle, you could see it in many ways as a continuation of the aborted efforts by not only the founding fathers, but also the people who were working with Abraham Lincoln to try to extend the successful aspects of the best of the United States to the rest of the world in helping the nations of the world not only break free of poverty and starvation and other things, but also of divide to conquer wars by enhancing everyone's ability to have full spectrum economies, manufacturing, agriculture, industry, everything in every nation, so that all trade that would happen internationally would actually be fair trade under that basis. So what I want to do today is share a dense PowerPoint, which I put together kind of last minute, but I think it'll come together nicely. So I'll do a share screen here.
Hey, Matthew, when you bring up that PowerPoint, can you bring it up in presentation mode so that way
Oh, yeah.
It'll go a little bit more, it'll be a bit larger for the audience.
Okay. Oh, damn. Uh-oh. All right. Okay, hopefully nobody really registered any of the things that flash in front of their faces subconsciously. So what we'll do, I just want to say as a little bit of a self-plug, 2 days ago on July 4th, I was able to finish a book I'd been working on for a while. It's the first volume of a 2-volume series called The Clash of the Two Americas, Volume 1, The Unfinished Symphony. On the cover, I selected, and it's not published yet. My other books that are published are right there on the screen, and this should be published very, very soon. Volume 2 is mostly written as well, which this first volume deals with like America, the fight for creating on this world an international system of sovereign republics that Ben Franklin spearheaded, and it goes all the way until 1901 with the assassination of William McKinley. So just to put that out there, that keep that on your radar. It's coming out, and the picture that I selected was by Benjamin Franklin's friend Benjamin West, who was a leading painter that Ben Franklin arranged to be installed in Britain in the 1770s, where this guy Benjamin West he was the founder and the president of the British Academy of Fine Arts, where he completely transformed it was real cultural warfare on a very high level. And Benjamin West painted this in 1783. This is the signing of the Treaty of Paris. And the Treaty of Paris is something, this is what ended the Revolutionary War against Britain. But it's never been finished. And I love that it has never been finished because the British delegation refused to come and sit. You have John Jay, Franklin, Adams, you have Franklin's grandson. I forget the guy behind. But the British delegation just never showed up. And so the painting couldn't be finished. And I think that really speaks well for what the story of the United States actually is. Because it didn't really end in 1783. It's been an ongoing process ever since then, punctuated by moments that really leap out as civil wars or points of crisis. But it's always been a fight between this deep state thing within the U.S. that never left in 1776, and then something genuine. And approaching it in any other way really leaves one's mind handicapped. So the spirit of Ben Franklin is going to run strong throughout the story, but I figured the first quote is the famous quote that we might as well start with Ben Franklin from the 1760s looking cheekily at us. I love this painting where he says, "Those who would sacrifice liberty for security deserve neither." And that's a lesson for all times.
Amen.
All right. So the thing with the United States, and I mentioned this already, the United Nations Charter, the fight of Franklin Roosevelt against Churchill, against Keynes, against the colonialists, this was sort of a third potential for breaking the system of empire forever and awakening something beautiful in humanity globally. That was the third time. The second time is something that I want to just introduce here before we get to 1776. This is something which I have used a lot in my writings. This is an image, a map taken from an 1890 book by William Gilpin, Abraham Lincoln's bodyguard, the man who literally kept Lincoln alive before inauguration. He was known as the prophet of progress, of the prophet of manifest destiny. He was one of the earliest architects of the American transcontinental railway going back to the 1840s. His family, the Gilpin family, was highly enmeshed with Ben Franklin's Philosophical Society, were major builders of the Erie Canal projects. They were major defenders of the National Bank. And Gilpin really fit into that tradition really well. And towards the end of his life, after he defended the Union during the Civil War, as he was the governor of the Colorado Territory, during a very strategic period when the South, the British-funded South, we're trying to open up a Western front in the United States, which would have probably been too much for Lincoln to handle. And the United States would have been at that time early on severed and reabsorbed back into the empire. But he kept that Western front from opening up by unleashing Lincoln greenbacks in Colorado when there was no money. He did what Lincoln later on did. And he moved on for the last 30 years of his life to promote internationally with many other people around the world this idea of a economic, just, and correct map of the world. What you see is a Pacific-centered world. It's one vectored around this keystone of rail development from the old world in Russia all the way through the Americas, down into South America, Africa, Asia, Europe, you name it. So this is a brilliant vision that was really moving forward at that time. And it wasn't just this one eccentric in the United States who was promoting this. Everyone was talking about this. You had people, some of the leading friends of the United States, of Abraham Lincoln, who were applying Lincoln's successful method of statecraft in their own parts of the world, included just a few of them, like Sergei Witte, the guy who becomes prime minister of Russia on the left. You have Otto von Bismarck. You have Sadi Carnot, the guy who becomes president of France, who's assassinated in 1895. You have Friedrich List, who's studied. He's a German who creates the German Zollverein, the customs union, modeled on what the United States had done to unify the 13 colonies and the Northwest ordinances around protectionism and large-scale development. Frederick List's ideas go on to influence Bismarck. They're directly inspired by the U.S. experience. So this is now spreading after the Civil War internationally, and nations are finally breaking away from British free trade, British maritime control of the seas, and a new age is really dawning. This is an example of the Trans-Siberian Railway, which was completed in 1905. It was begun in 1890. It was being discussed already in the 1850s when people like the American engineer George Washington Whistler was brought to St. Petersburg, where he was the architect alongside a bunch of Russians that he was friends with, of the St. Petersburg-Moscow Railway, the biggest railway of Europe at that time. That was an American who was brought in, and And going forward, that was going to be extended upon, and it was extended upon to build the first transcontinental railway of the European area. And that was the Trans-Siberian, built with American locomotives from Baldwin locomotives from Philadelphia. And some of the leading representatives of that are there on the right. Go through the story in the upcoming book in many articles. But again, the key point was this was done with protective tariffs, large-scale development, productive credit, and it was a complete disobedience, a rejection of British political economy. And obviously in the United States, you had, by 1867, the construction of the Transcontinental Railway that was begun during the Civil War by Lincoln. So in the middle of the Civil War in 1863, he begins this, funded by Greenback's large-scale credit to unify the nation. And he had a whole program that, again, was sabotaged before it could go forward. Gilpin, writing in the book, writes that his vision that railways continue to extend themselves so soon to become a universal system over all the lands of the globe. We have seen the energies of the American people bringing into line and into use these new powers, span their continent with the Pacific railways, as with the rapidity of lightning from a mountain loud, availing themselves of the favorable thermal warmth of the plateau and upon the immediate seacoasts, bathed by the Asiatic Gulf Stream. They will continue to expand their work to the Bering Straits, where all the continents are united. This will extend itself along similarly propitious thermal selvage, I don't know what that means, to the oriental Russian coasts into China. Talking about rail lines now into China, right? To prolong this unbroken line of cosmopolitan railways along the latitudinal plateaus of Asia to Moscow and to London will not have long delay. The less significant and isolated continents of the Southern Hemisphere, South America, Africa, and Australasia, will be reached by feeders through the Panama, Suez, and the chain of oriental peninsulas and islands. The whole area and all the populations of the globe will thus be united and fused by land, travel, and railway. Again, this is very, when you read his book and you look at the types of discussions that were happening during that time, it's very much reflective of the Belt and Road Initiative and the type of thinking motivating the Russian-China alliance today, which is really built around an idea of international cooperation, but not built around one world government of a strong unipolar thing telling the weak what to do. It's built upon the elevation of everybody to a higher standard of living by sharing the rights to access industrial production. And also, you know, Gilpin is very clear that he's a follower of Alexander Hamilton, of Henry Clay, who are the great American nationalist economists and statesmen of the 19th century. That's how this is going to be funded, is through an idea of national credit. Now, this doesn't happen, right? And it doesn't happen. This brings in now the other aspect. We're going to jump back very soon, 100 years into the past, to look at the American Revolution. But one of the things that confuses a lot of Canadians that I interact with, and this is why I largely set up the Canadian Patriot magazine, is to develop a better understanding of what is Canada by acknowledging really the ugliness, but also then being able to appreciate more the beautiful moments where we almost became a real country. Which is why, again, it's a bit weird for me to celebrate Canada Day when we have this history. And also, this is not just the history, this is the present. So our founding father, you in the United States have George Washington. We have Sir John A. Macdonald, and that's our founding father of Canada. And for Sir John A. Macdonald, he makes a point in 1867. That's the year we get our first so-called constitution. Before that, we were just sort of severed British colonies of the Americas. And he says, I would be quite willing, personally, to leave the whole country a wilderness for the next half century. But I fear if Englishmen do not go there, then the Yankees will. So again, let that seep in, right? And this is the founding father of Canada. A lot of Canadian nationalists love this guy, but this is a guy who not only said he doesn't want development of the nation, he only did it practically because he understood that the momentum of the time was inevitably going to lead to the United States extending rail throughout the Americas as a continent. And that type of pressure would not have allowed British possessions to be maintained, since the British way of doing things is always to prevent development, to keep a nation and a colony subjugated so that you could better exploit their resources at best.
Exactly.
That's still a practice today. That's what they were doing then. So the idea of why do we have a Canadian railway that was completed in 1885? There was no financial incentive for it. Our population was just like today, then less than 1/10 of the United States. There was no demand by the people overall in Canada to build this thing. It was highly expensive. It took 15 years, and it was done as the founding father, who said, "I'm a Britisher. I was born a Britisher. I will die." This is a racist guy who called for an Aryan Canada. He wanted Aryanism to be in our founding documents as a policy.
The myth of Aryanism.
Yeah, he was really into this weird stuff. So the idea of creating a wedge between the US-Russia friendship and alliance that was going to transform the world forever was always what the British saw Canada as a wedge. And they saw that there was also a lot of pro-Americans all over Canada, especially coming out of the Civil War. A lot of Canadians wanted to work to either become an independent republic, or many of them, like in the case especially of British Columbia, which was an isolated colony. That's a low-res map. This is what Canada was in 1867. It's all a private land. It's run by the Hudson's Bay Company, which is called Rupert's Land. It was a private thing for over 200 years, which was the majority of the North. Then you had a little sliver on one side being Upper and Lower Canada with a couple of other little colonies on the Maritimes. And then on the other side, on the Pacific, you had British Columbia as an isolated colony suffering mass depression, underdevelopment. There was a whole annexation movement in British Columbia during this time to say, like, they don't have any relationship to the east coast of Canada. There was the only relationship that they had economically, the people who lived there, was with San Francisco. And so they were like, well, if Britain is going to let us hang and go into, the gold rush had popped, the gold bubble had popped, there was no future. They're like, well, let us at least annex to the US and benefit from this massive progress that's happening there. And there was a massive fight during this entire 1865 or 64 period, all the way until 1869, 1870, which is involved the British just saying, okay, they're freaked out. The Union was preserved. The British put all of their resources into supporting the Confederate South, keeping giving the Confederate Secret Service control or access to all of these Canadian territories in Toronto and Montreal, which ran the assassination of Lincoln. It ran terrorist activities against the Union from the north, and they failed. Russia came in. The Russian fleet on the east and west coast of the United States was a direct message to the European colonialists or the empire, saying, if you guys come in openly now on a higher level supporting the Confederacy, that's a casus belli with Russia. That kept them down. But now Britain was about to lose control of the entire territory that they valued so deeply. So they sold. There was legislation passed to sell for pennies on the dollar Rupert's Land, give it to the Canadian government, so that way it would streamline the building of a rail.
Yep.
The canceling of all of BC's debts as a bribe to BC, saying, okay, well, but also the creation
by proxy.
All by proxy. Yeah, they were on the other side of the ocean. Yeah, and also they were like, okay, we'll extend the British North America Act, the Canadian Constitution, to the rest of BC. They just have to join. BC really didn't want to join British Columbia. They were like, no, again, we don't want to. So on top of what I just mentioned, you also had the mysterious murder of the governor of British Columbia, who was he was a defender of the annexation movement, Frederick Seymour. He was he died under very mysterious circumstances, and when he was ousted, BC was fast-tracked into this thing. But this thing is not really a constitution in any way like you would think of one compared to the United States, which we will look at. But the British North America Act said that whereas the provinces of Canada, Nova Scotia, New Brunswick have expressed their desire to be federally united into one dominion under the crown of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Ireland, with a constitution similar in principle to that of the United Kingdom, and whereas such a union would conduce to the welfare of the provinces and promote the interests of the British Empire. And then they go on to to outline the organization of the society in Canada around a privy council, around a governor general, mostly a deep state that would then organize everything. And the idea of rights were not something seen as inalienable, the way you have in the Declaration of Independence. They were seen as something that was granted to the Canadians by the monarch. That's all it was. And it wasn't the idea of the general welfare of the U.S. Constitution, which is the heart and soul of what makes the Constitution work, is not there at all. In our case, it's the welfare of the provinces and the promotion of the interests of the British Empire. That's the constitutional preamble of Canada. So, I mean, this is a mess. And this is what really subverted in many, many ways the creation of a new era of win-win cooperation that was, again, really unfolding as a pregnant moment in time. A lot of assassinations had to happen to make this happen. Not only Lincoln, you had Garfield, you had McKinley, you had, as I mentioned, Governor Seymour, you had Sadi Carnot, who was assassinated in France. You had Alexander II, who was assassinated by a British-run anarchist bomb. You had Alexander
People
III.
were dropping like flies.
Oh, man.
It was ridiculous.
The only other time I've seen that density of murder of statesmen was during the Kennedy period and a little afterwards. Yeah, internationally. So, okay. So this is what subverts what I'd like to think of as the Second American Revolution, the chance to finally finalize the dream of 1776. And I mentioned Ben Franklin plays prominently in this. Obviously, everyone knows this, but I think the problem with our understanding of Ben Franklin is he's turned into a bit of a caricature in our current age. It's either he's seen as a creepy, womanizer who is like a tinkerer, or there's so many slanders on him, or he's banalized into the guy you just see on money. And there's nothing more substantial. But the entire thing that came to be the 1776 Declaration and everything that came afterwards, the success of the U.S. War of Independence, and so much more, could not have happened were it not for the mind and actions of this man going back to the 1720s, I would say. It was already in motion under this guy's increasing responsibilities that he took on for himself. But it is, 2 days after Independence Day, so let's just read this. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. V, you want to just read this? You got a good reading voice.
We hold these truths to be self-evident. Oh, let me put on my deep voice. Hold on.
Yeah, do it.
Well, my screen is acting a little. I'll do it. Give me 1 second. Declaration of Independence. My screen's a little wonky. Here we go. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, and they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, derived their just powers from the consent of the governed, that whenever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or to abolish it, and to institute a new government, laying its foundation on such principles, and organizing its powers in such form as to them shall seem most likely to affect their safety and happiness. Prudence, indeed, will dictate that governments long established should not be changed for light and transient causes, and accordingly all experience hath shown that mankind are more disposed to suffer, while evils are unsufferable, than to right themselves by abolishing the forms to which they are accustomed.
Perfect. Perfect. No, that's great. That's great. And yeah, if we ever do a serious action-packed like Schwarzenegger version of the American Revolution in Hollywood, they gotta hire you. They gotta hire you to be that guy. That's perfect. Washington. Sylvester Stallone plays John Adams.
Hey, he's kind of messed up there.
So this is the thing. So to get across obviously everyone's had this, probably they've read this many times, but in the context of what I'm saying, I just wanted this read along with the preamble of the U.S. Constitution of we, the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity, do ordain and establish this Constitution. And again, you have a painting there where Ben Franklin, in both cases, you have Ben Franklin, Adams, and Jefferson there. Now, Jefferson is given sole credit, and that gives, I think, sometimes a little bit of trouble for those who are trying to say that, no, the haters are wrong, that the U.S. is really founded upon the idea that all men are created equal, while Jefferson was a giant slave owner. Now, that's a big hypocrisy, and it's troublesome. Jefferson was a mixed bag. He had good moments. He had really bad moments. But the idea of trying to plug him as the sole author misses the actual truth, because there were 42 revisions. He kept on sending version after version back to Ben Franklin, who was the real mind behind the crafting of this thing. And Ben Franklin kept on saying, no, try it again, get rid of this idea of property, replace it with happiness, do something. And he kept on modifying it as his editor. So to simply give Jefferson again sole credit, the guy who did didn't even free his slaves after he died. He didn't even let them go free. That again does harm, I think, to the deeper process of history. So Ben Franklin, key guy. Again, Constitutional Convention, 1787. The U.S. was, at this point, 1787, without a constitution, without a strong federal government. It was obviously going to be divided up. The British never gave up after signing the 1783 Peace of Paris. The economic warfare continued. The internal operations within the deep state of the United States under Aaron Burr and others. Aaron Burr being, by the way, you brought up J.P. Morgan, yep. Wall Street. Aaron Burr was the founder of Wall Street. He was the creator of the first Bank of Manhattan around the 1790s. And he literally was the leader of the U.S. deep state that was always, he didn't just kill Hamilton, he did a lot more. And he was always under the pay and under the direction of British intelligence. There's quotes lifted from history that directly point this out. But all that to say, you had the U.S. Constitution, which was the thing that created that federal government under the idea of the general welfare, that everything would be read from the principle of the general welfare, economically, foreign policy, everything. And again, Ben Franklin was the lead guy. And there in the middle, you have Franklin looking right at you. It's a 1940s painting. And you have next to him, you got Hamilton, his prodigy, talking to him. And there was something that, again, the fight is so much more rich than the fluffy Hallmark story we're given, which just brushes over the deeper fights. So Franklin is everywhere in the story. And for Canadians, because I'm talking to both Americans and Canadians, Canadians often pride themselves today for being not American. And you can't blame some Canadians, especially baby boomers, people who lived through, the Cold War. They saw the United States acting very badly, jumping into wars in Vietnam. They saw U.S. corporations increasingly buy up Canada. They saw it under NAFTA and other things. So they've seen the U.S. behaving like a shithead for a very long time. So you can't blame entirely people for being anti-American. But it gets out of hand. And there's a lack of appreciation for what has taken control of the United States, such that it is acting so contradictory to its own founding principles and better traditions. There's no appreciation. So Canada was offered the chance to be a part of the Declaration of Independence. We were even given, Ben Franklin was up here for several months, organizing in Montreal in May and April of 1776 to try to persuade the Canadians to send a delegation down and sign on as the 14th colony to say to Great Britain, we're gonna go free. Unfortunately, that didn't turn out so well. The British controls back then were very, very high, and the corruption, the people of Quebec, because that was all Quebec was back of Canada. It was just French Canada. There was no English Canadians yet. They were that was the United Empire loyalists of the American blue blood establishment that were always they hated the American cause, and they were the ones who left in 1776, the Tories, and were given land in Toronto, what became Ontario and Quebec. But at this time, it was just the French. And the French loved the Americans, but the problem is the French priesthood, for the most part, as well as the governors, the governor generals, who were the iron fist in Canada. It was a dictatorship. They basically passed rules in the churches saying that any French Canadian farmer or anybody who would fight with Washington is going to be excommunicated. And for a Catholic farmer, a peasant, that's a big deal. That means you're going to burn in hell forever. Yeah. So that was a big incentive to not do it, unfortunately. And Ben Franklin left Quebec empty-handed, and it became 13 colonies, not 14.
Matthew, can I ask a quick question?
Yes, sir.
In terms of the forming the Declaration of Independence, the ideas of America, the Republic, and then looking to how secret organizations, secret societies, all those things. Did the Masons play a role in that? By the way,
yes,
everything was created in regards to the founding fathers, Washington D.C.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
No. And the thing to understand about in those days, in the 18th and the 19th centuries and earlier, there was the means of communicating across broad expanses of distance was very difficult, right? It took a month to get a message from the Americas to England. Okay, if you were trying to arrange and organize an international array of collaborators behind a conspiracy for either good or for bad, because I mean, people try to say that conspiracies by definition are bad. That's not true. Conspiracy as a word is a neutral term. It just means people conspiring, breathing together, working together for a common idea, right? That's all the word means. So it could be infused for good conspiracies, as I'm making the point that the American Revolution was a good conspiracy, and for bad, for evil. Now, at that time, you had espionage on a much higher level than people realize everywhere. Double agents, triple agents were all over the place. And one of the only ways to ensure you didn't have like encrypted emailing. That didn't exist, right? Where you could just send from like Proton Mail to Proton Mail. Not that I think that that's all that secure these days, but still, you didn't have encryption, right? You didn't have things like that. So if you wanted to coordinate, one of the pieces of infrastructure that were in place were the lodges. And so there was a battle that happened throughout this entire period, and this battle goes back for a long time between, especially peaking with the Italian Renaissance, where you had secret societies, lodges that were in communication with other lodges that coordinated affairs. Now you had, yes, Ben Franklin, you had Mozart, you had Washington, Lafayette, many, many leading figures around the world were Masons. That throws a lot of people off, because if you just have the equation in your mind, Freemasons equal pure evil, everything Freemasons do, and thus everybody who is involved with Freemasons are thus evil, and that's your formula to explain history, then you miss the fights within these institutions, especially at this time, between the British, like York Rite, Scottish Rite, Freemasonic lodges, and those lodges that were secured by Ben Franklin and his collaborators in France, especially, which were operating under humanist principles. And you could see that especially in Austria, where you had Mozart's, look at the Magic Flute. It's Mozart was a friend of the American Revolution. Many of his operas and music was inspired by that as well, by the idea of a new age of brotherhood. So was Beethoven, very much so. So his Magic Flute was a Masonic opera. The guy who runs the Masonic lodge that Mozart is a part of is this guy Schenkinator. Schenkinator is somebody, when you read, and it's been archived, they had a magazine, a science magazine, which was demystifying these different secret symbolisms and introducing real science for the population, so that the symbols weren't just things that make you brainwashed, where you just like go into a trance and you repeat a ritual to get to a higher level. At a certain point, you're drinking baby blood. And so with Schenkinator's magazines and things that were circulating, he was really declaring war on the entire idea of Gnosticism, the idea of that there's a knowledge for the inner elites, and that is always going to be independent from a knowledge for the masses who have to stay dumb. That's a master-slave society, and they were operating under a very different idea. So it's really the Gnostic versus anti-Gnostic groups. And I would say in Europe, by the 1815 Congress of Vienna, most of the humanist lodges that Marquis de Lafayette was a part of were purged, and their leaders were assassinated in Europe. I've seen evidence of the more positive humanist traditions in the American lodges. Not all of them, because a lot of them are evil as sin, like Albert Pike, right? Or a lot of the New England Transcendentalists are part of this too, running a counter operation. But that continued a little bit longer, where you had positive influences within the Masonic systems, or some of the lodges in the Americas, before that seems to have been purged in the 20th century. I don't see any evidence of that these days so much. Maybe it's out there. I don't see it. All that to say, back to the story. So,
okay.
So Benjamin Franklin, as a surprise for Canadians, he founded not just American institutions. He wasn't only an American nation builder. This is a Canadian 2006 homage stamp commemorating Ben Franklin. And you're like, why? Why is Ben Franklin on the Canadian stamp? It's because Ben Franklin was the founder of Canada's Canada's Postal Service in 1763, which extended postal services, which again, you have to have it in the age before electronic communication. Without postal service, your population was going to be a little local peasant population, very easy to control, right? You didn't have access to newspapers as well, which Ben Franklin was also the founder of Canada's first newspaper. That's Fleury de Mesplat. The guy Ben Franklin recruits while he's an ambassador in France in the 1770s, and he brings Mesplat to Quebec to set up the printing press. He helps him out, provides the funds, the equipment, and Mesplat starts printing the Montreal Gazette as part of the cultural education, because how are you going to get people to fight for an idea of independence, of freedom, if they don't even know how to read? And that's part of the feudal problem of France and of Quebec, was there was this encrusted seigneurie system, this lordship system, where it was a master-slave dichotomy, where the peasants ran the fields like talking cows. They didn't have to read, and there was a policy even enforced by much of the church at the time to keep that ignorance going. That made it impossible for people to risk their lives for a higher ideal when they couldn't read. So this was a big part of Ben Franklin's designs. So again, a big nation builder in Canada too. And I mentioned he was here. One of the things in 1774 also that kept Canada away from, or Quebec from joining the U.S. cause, was a bribe in 1774, which was it's actually outlined in the Declaration of Independence as one of the intolerable acts. So it's the Declaration was not just about not wanting to pay taxes or not liking taxes on tea or things like that. That's how idiots today try to oversimplify what the cause was. There was something like 28 different elements of issues that the U.S. Leaders had.
You sure about that? You sure it wasn't a 3% tax on Earl Grey tea?
I don't think so. But so one of the biggest things that was also a bribe for Canada was the Quebec Act, which basically turned on the left is the geography, right, of British territories in North America. And in 1774, the Quebec Act was passed that extended, it basically took native lands, gave it over to the British, and surrounded the lands all the way to the Ohio River, that prevented the development of the inland zone, which was always the dream of Ben Franklin. And going back to Cotton Mather and even Winthrop, there was always an idea of a continental new type of society founded upon natural law. This goes back to the founding of the Massachusetts Bay Colony in 1630, which is, and that's why they called it the Continental Congress. It wasn't called the Congress of the 13 Colonies. The idea was always to not first make it work here in North America, far enough removed from the corruption of the old world, where the families, the nasty heirs of the Roman Empire of Venice had encrusted their tentacles sufficiently deep that no revolutionary possibility was going to happen. And this was far enough away from that. And then when that could work, then it would spread more broadly. So this is one of the things that kept, as well as, burning in hellfire forever. This is one of the things that kept Quebec out of the revolution. So, and today, as the audience, I hope people don't mind. I'm going a little bit more in presentation mode because it's such an important concept that I just want people to really, really get this as a unified idea. Benjamin West. So the guy, I remember the cover of my book that's coming out, that's a painting by Benjamin West. Again, the president of the British Royal Academy of Fine Arts in London. Benjamin West in 1815 paints Ben Franklin as Prometheus with scientific experiments, not only his discovery of electricity, electric fire at the time, and he was known as the Prometheus of America. That's what all of the European scientists called him. Because, he had no university education. He had no high school education. I think he had a grade 3 education, but he was so self-governed that he didn't waste time. He used all of his time well, going back to the age of 10 when he first met Cotton Mather and was recruited to Cotton Mather's conspiracy in the 1715 period. So this is the thing. This is a painting by Benjamin West of the character, the soul of Ben Franklin. I don't know why there's a creepy baby that looks like an old man, but whatever, in the background. So I'm not going to go through the keystones of his life, but needless to say, there's a lot. And the discovery of Ben Franklin's 1751 discovery of electricity is inextricably linked to his later creation of a system of natural law. There were two sides of natural law, moral and physical, and he understood them as one thing. Today, anybody trying to think of science without the idea of politics and morality are are mentally and spiritually handicapped, and vice versa. But this guy is on top of things. And I mentioned here there's a book by Graham Lowry, a historian who passed away some years ago, who did something called How the Nation Was Won, which goes through the story wonderfully. I've used this. I've read this like 5 times. It's an amazing resource. Maybe you guys could put this in the description box of the video. But he was deployed on a counterintelligence operation of London's Hellfire Club. That was a secret society of pure evil. Isaac Newton was a part of this. Bernard de Mondeville was one of the leading thinkers behind it.
Not Isaac Newton.
Yeah.
Not the holy man of God that was inspired by the Lord himself.
Yeah. God even threw an apple at him to help him make discoveries. Yes. Yeah, and anybody who thinks that that's how you make a discovery, by having fruit drop on your head, sorry.
I have fruit drop on my head all the time. I have yet to make a discovery.
There you go. Testify, brother. So, yeah, I mean, so he infiltrates this thing as part of a counterintel operation. And this is, again, why people think that, oh, yeah, he's this evil Hellfire Club operative. It's like, no, he got intel from the inside, deployed by Cotton Mather. And Graham Lowry goes through how that happened really nicely. One of the things about Ben Franklin is he never writes his true thoughts down, because you cannot. There's so much interception of letters going on all sides at that time. So you can't fully say generally what you think without burning the letter if you're going to conspire. That's why smoking gun evidence usually goes up in smoke when people are trying to look for the proof, of conspiracies in history. They're there, but they're rare, and you're not going to find it. He has to, he lives a life governed by a higher intention he has to somewhat keep secured. But you see it in the shadows, in the actions that he takes, in the accomplishments that he does, creating the first gazettes, the first fire departments, new innovations in musical instruments. He discovers the Gulf Stream. He's the guy who discovers the Gulf Stream. The terms battery charge conductor are developed by Ben Franklin. This guy is organizing. He's organizing networks across Europe. He even sets up the first plan for unions. So the join or die thing, people think of this as a rallying cartoon that Ben Franklin did for the American Revolution. No, this is the 1756 plan of union that he was trying to organize already before the French-Indian War. They call it that, but it's really the French-British War. Before that, he was trying to create a unified grouping of the colonies to act with one mind, which was subverted. It passed in Albany, but it didn't pass elsewhere. But this, again, just more evidence that this stuff goes back further. And it go back even further to 1729. And you have Ben Franklin writing in The Necessity of a Paper Currency, which outlines a program for the economic liberation of the colonies. He describes here how we have no poor houses in the colonies. And if we had some, there would be nobody to put them in, since there is in the colonies not a single unemployed person, neither beggars nor tramps. In the colonies, we issue our own paper money, and it is called colonial scrip. We issue it in proper proportion to make the goods and pass easily from the producers to the consumers. In this manner, creating ourselves our own paper money, we control its purchasing power, and we have no interest to pay to no one. Powerful. And this goes on to define, he amplifies this in his attack on Malthus, on the importance of population growth in 1751, where he gets across that value is not in the money itself. It's not in gold or some material thing that exists in space and time. It exists in the power of the mind to improve upon creation. And he's very clear on that any political economy has to be defined around that idea of value as located in the powers of the mind, the unlimited resource, which is the mind, to constantly perfect our understanding of natural law of the universe and apply that back in the form of new technologies, new inventions, which is why Ben Franklin is such a renowned not only inventor, but he's also a man who he encouraged as many people to become inventors and made it possible by providing legal protections for inventions than anybody else in history. And just some of the people who carried on and advanced upon this policy I just threw out here as American system leaders of Alexander Hamilton. And people who bash Hamilton have not actually read either his works or looked at the actual fights he led. They're reading slanders that have been popular for over 2 centuries, ironically often funded by the people who organized his assassination in 1804. You have Henry Clay. You have Henry C. Carey, Lincoln's lead economic advisor. Henry Clay, before that, was the guy that Lincoln said was the core inspiration, as did Gilpin, who was a major defender of protectionism, large-scale development, internal improvements. You have Matthew Carey, the father of Henry C. Carey, and a friend of Ben Franklin, who Ben Franklin brought in from Ireland. You have John Quincy Adams, who fought to create a continental nation or continental interest, and as well as a foreign policy vectored around a community of common principle. That was America's first strong anti-colonial foreign policy that later gave rise to the UN Charter that FDR loved, with the good neighbor policy, and obviously Lincoln. Ben Franklin also was one of the first popularizers of Confucianism in the Americas, going back to the 1730s. And there's two books here for this story. People should read Anton Chaikin, who you guys have interviewed recently. His Who We Are Volume 1 goes through this story perfectly, better than anything I've ever seen. That's just been made available. His Volume 2 is coming out soon. David Wang is a professor. I had the pleasure of reviewing his recent book that will be published in about a month or two on Ben Franklin, America and China, and Ben Franklin's influence of Chinese civilization, especially Confucius and Mencius. Yeah. And Ben Franklin was producing this in his Poor Richard's Almanac. He was producing sayings from Confucius, the life of Confucius. He even said to a friend that the model for his life is Jesus and Confucius and Socrates. So
that's because Ben Franklin was really a secret communist. That's what it was.
Yes, that is what the hillbillies will say when they hear this. But yeah, I mean, like, this guy is just such a universal mind. He's looking for what's universal in every culture and trying to feed that back, including Chinese techniques of making silk, which he brings to the Americas, different forms of technologies in China, canal building that was done in China, he brings into the United States. So it's serious. So this brings us now to a transition to the last part of my presentation, which is the international aspects of the revolution. The revolution was not a revolution of 13 colonies, right? I think people have started to get in the point. It involved an international web, a conspiracy across the reaches of the world, stretching from France, where we had on the left Marquis de Lafayette, the young 19-year-old revolutionary who broke the law and joined a grouping of other French patriots to come to the Americas in 1777 to lend their hand to the cause. And he later on organized very closely with Ben Franklin to get the Treaty of Alliance with France in 1778 that brought France in fully to finally tip the balance in some ways in favor of the United States that was going to be crushed easily by the British. The US was not doing well as a standalone. So Ben Franklin, being in Europe, organizing for decades this grouping through his discovery of electricity, that was a big one. Tadeusz Kosciuszko, the great general of Poland, who is later on goes back to Poland after he trains and works with the Americans and helps fight a lot of major strategic battles against the British. He goes back to Poland and leads the Polish Republican movement, which unfortunately is crushed later on. You have also what's the name? Steuben, General Wilhelm von Steuben, who was deployed by Frederick the Great of Prussia to go and help train the U.S. farmers to become soldiers. His training, his intellect is vital strategically in organizing strategic battle plans that again tip the scales. Here we have Catherine the Great and her young leading ally Ekaterina Dashkova. And this is a fascinating story too, because in 1780, Russia chimes in finally under Catherine the Great and defends the American cause by creating what's called the League of Armed Neutrality. The reason why, basically, this is what sets the foundation for modern maritime law in times of war, which guarantees all neutral players in a conflict to have freedom of navigation, such that the British couldn't confiscate arms, equipment, and other things that were going from Europe or Russia to help the U.S. Rebels against the British. The reason why this worked was Ben Franklin in 1780, while still in France, organized. He met a young girl, Ekaterina Dashkova, who helped Catherine the Great attain power some years earlier. She was in her 30s, and what makes this girl so fascinating is she was the president of the Russian Academy of Sciences. She was the first woman president of that academy, I think the only woman president, and a major reformer of it. She was also an artist, a playwright. But she totally overhauled the academy from a lot of the corruption it had suffered and stagnation. And she became a good friend with Ben Franklin, and even made Ben Franklin a member of the Russian Academy of Sciences at the same time that Franklin reciprocated by making her a member of his Philosophical Society, which was an international science society, basically, with people, again, all of these guys were members of Marquis de Lafayette, many, many others. So all that to say, this plays a key role. And soon, you have nations like Sweden, Denmark, Prussia, Austria join the League of Armed Neutrality. And this provides vital supplies for the next 3 years to the Americas. To the American rebels. But it doesn't just end with Europe. Right. I would also just add to Ireland, right? Very close proximity to the beast. But 20 of the leading generals of the Continental Congress were Irishmen, many of whom returned back to Ireland and fought to lead the 1797 rebellion against the British that was supposed to establish an independent Irish Republic, which was unfortunately subverted. At that time, the world was turning more and more into a mess because it required the French Revolution to have been a success. And at the time, that was subverted in it began in 1789 in a very good way. A lot of the Ben Franklin's leading collaborators unleashed the French Revolution in a peaceful way that involved the collaboration of the king, Louis XVI. And the Tennis Court Oath and the Declaration of the Rights of Man were beautiful documents. Thomas Paine was an architect of that. But unfortunately, a lot of the great scientists who were trying to bring this into being lost their heads. Marquis de Lafayette only avoided getting his head cut off by escaping to Austria, where he lived out the Revolution of France in a Austrian dungeon for 5 years. But Lavoisier, the president, Jean-Sylvain Bailly, of the mayor of Paris, who was also the leading astronomer of Europe, and a leader of he was the guy who headed the Assemblée Nationale in France, all got their heads cut off by 1791 to 93, 94, when the British British intelligence under Jeremy Bentham, who, by the way, was who Aaron Burr lived with for 5 years after killing Hamilton later on. But Shelburne especially and Bentham organized to turn the French Revolution into a Jacobin bloody terror, a color revolution, effectively. I go through that in my book that's coming out soon. So people want to know more about that, they can read that book or read the articles that I've written on the French Revolution. But all that to say that that revolution had to succeed in France first before it could spread to Poland, to Ireland, to other parts of Prussia even. And without that, it was a mess and they were subverted. So that's part of the tragedy of history. It's to sort of see the potential of what should have been, how it was subverted. Now, the surprising thing for me in digging around in some of this history was that it wasn't isolated to Europe. It involved India. The Muslim leader Hyder Ali, who ran the Mysore region of India, the most important strategic zone of India was Mysore. And Hyder Ali, from 1780, declares a full-scale war on the British. And again, Ben Franklin's collaborators are behind this in many ways, to helping to coordinate. Where this is the French I think he's the ambassador to India, Suffren, who is the guy who arranges to provide the French Navy to assist in Hyder Ali's rebellion, which successfully kicks the ass of the British again and again and again. Britain is annihilated in so many wonderful instances. It's really enjoyable to watch or to read some of these accounts. Now, Hyder Ali dies in 1782, but despite that, this is one painting, a rendition of the Indian Hyder Ali and Tipu Sultan. His son's name is Tipu Sultan, who continues to lead the fight against the British after 1782 when Hyder Ali dies. But these are rockets annihilating the British soldiers in India. It's
amazing.
Yeah, these rockets were like nothing that had ever been seen. They could travel for over 2 miles with ingenious tubing and fuels for propulsion.
This was invented by them?
Yeah, it's invented by the Muslim Indians.
Wow, man. The Mysore Rebellion is pretty impressive. Jesus,
it's
wow, that's impressive.
So impressive.
Great region for some of the best tea in the world, by the way.
As well, yeah, which exactly. But see, at the time, the British had another idea in mind, right? Because they were like, okay, India at the time still had a lot of textiles. They were the best tea makers, obviously, but they had the best textiles, the most advanced. They were the second GDP in the world at this time behind China. China was number one by a long shot. India was number two. Advanced technology, advanced science, before the British come in and screw things up for both China and India in the 19th century. Right. But at this time, Britain goes and steals, after they finally put down this, it takes them over a decade of constant fighting with the Mysore's, to finally put down the rebellion. And they never forgive India for this, but they steal all of these technologies in textile manufacturing, in munitions, in rocketry. And then by 1804, they just confiscate it and send it to Britain, which is what all empires do. They can't create unto themselves. They can just steal from others.
Plus $37 trillion worth of wealth.
As well. Exactly. And what do they leave in exchange for India, which becomes the crown jewel? They systematically, crush all of India's indigenous textile manufacturing capability. Yep. They say, no, Britain's going to do that. You will stay low level, underdeveloped. And they destroy their history. They destroy libraries upon libraries to try to create an amnesia of what India actually is.
Oh yeah, man.
They allow some things to be salvaged and promoted, like the Kama Sutra. That's fine. But everything
right. Yeah.
But everything else that indicates any nobility in the Indian culture, they really systematically try to destroy. And they say that India, your main thing that you're going to do from now on in the 19th century is make opium. That'll be your main GDP, your main source of wealth. And we're going to sell that opium. You'll get some money that'll like encrust your Brahmins, your corrupt, caste system that they inflame. Because Hyder Ali was not a fan of the caste system, right? Neither were the Sikhs.
Yep.
But the British go in and inflame that.
Many of the Indian Rajas at that time were not fans of that at all.
No, they weren't. No, exactly. And then, we're going to feed that opium to China. That's why they call the American deep state back in those days that were working with, that took over the Federalist Party after Hamilton died, and working with Aaron Burr, like Pickering. Thomas Pickering is one of these lead figures. They called them the Boston Brahmins. That was the name back in the day.
Boston Brahmins. That's brilliant.
That was literally how they were called. And also Tipu Sultan, right? Like they're not unaware of the U.S. rebellion happening at that time. Tipu Sultan in 1782 writes to the Continental Congress. He sends letters saying that every blow that is struck in the cause of American liberty throughout the world, in France, in India, and elsewhere, and so long as a single insolent savage tyrant remains, the struggle shall continue. Wow. And he's always him and Hyder Ali are self-aware that this is one fight. And by virtue of them doing what they did in 1780 to 83, especially, they absorbed 20% of the British Navy, which was supposed to go to suppress the rebellious Americans. And that was all redirected towards India. So that, again, gave the U.S. a strategic advantage that was needed. And they were all aware of it. There was collaboration happening, again, largely in many ways through the French that were supplying the lines. And you'll find that many of these guys are also Masons. Okay. Yep. Keep that in mind. That's partially how you're able to get the covert communications from one location to another. And again, keep in mind that by the time of the French Jacobin terror, the positive Masonic lodges in France are largely wiped out. There's not much left. So again, now let's look at another Muslim leader, a friend of America, the first nation in the world to recognize the Declaration of Independence. The first nation is Morocco in December 1777. December 1777. It's the first nation. And Emperor Sidi Muhammad stands out of all of the Northern African leaders at the time, because many of them were basically, working Barbary pirates. That was what they were called. The Barbary pirates were all over North Africa. They were very much collaborating in consort with the British East India Company. And the British were very conveniently providing many of these pirates insider information, intelligence for when American ships would be moving through that zone, especially through the Straits of Gibraltar and other places. And again and again, there was a disastrous occurrence of American ships getting taken over by the Barbary pirates and looted, and Americans being held hostage. Sidi Muhammad stands out by saying, no, he's a friend of the United States, and he provides protection for all American shipping and gives them safe harbor and passage through Morocco. And again, it's the French diplomats on the ground in Morocco at the time that arranged this amazing treaty. later on in 1784, Benjamin Franklin arranges to be, along with John Jay, part of a delegation to create a special economic arrangement with Morocco, which unfortunately is sabotaged by the American Barbary Wars that are artificially manipulated by the deep state of the United States at the time, as well as many of these agents on the ground in North Africa, who the books have been written on this. But one of the things also to keep in mind is that the first military ship produced from the United States after the Revolution was called the Hyder Ali. So the Americans were very, very grateful for this. Ben Franklin, I love this quote. I figured it would just end on how he sees himself. But on the whole, though I never arrived at the perfection I had been so ambitious of obtaining, but fell far short of it, yet I was, by the endeavor to be a better person, a better and happier man that I otherwise should have been had I not attempted it. So that is the tale that I wanted to tell of the true United States as an unfinished symphony. And I hope that is something which changes how people think of their nation, or what it is that they hope.
It's so beautifully said, man. And you know what? When you sit there and when people listen to this, and I urge people to go back and listen to this broadcast again, take some notes, okay? Stop thinking binary. This is why you got to look at the complexity of the world in its entirety. There's a lot of people that think that 1776 happened in a vacuum. Let me tell you something, man. 3% of the population risen up against the most powerful empire in the world, and we beat them. No, that's not what happened. You had key strategic things that were occurring throughout the world. You have the Russians that put the British in check. You have in North Africa, Sidi Muhammad, Emperor Sidi Muhammad was helping to put the British in check. And in the Mysore Rebellion, you have the Indians that were keeping the British in check. These things, and the French. Let's not forget the French. Vive la France. Oui. And they were doing their part. Why? Because they believed in an open economic system, a modular system that will allow countries to plug directly into it while maintaining their identity, their sovereignty, their culture, and being involved in real equitable trade. And that was all dashed to pieces over time because of financial interests that all link back to the City of London Corporation. And here we are today. That dream is alive, and it is well, and it is winning, but it's not happening here. One belt, one road. Matt.
Yeah, very well said. And I just find that is such an amazing irony of history, that the nations who are acting the most American in the tradition, like the actual meaning of the constitutional concepts and the Declaration of Independence and this American system that we just went through, are Russia and China. The nations that people think of are the most like opposite to the United States as you could get. This is actually, no, they're the ones who are defending the best traditions of what made America a good thing. By extending the Belt and Road, but also the principle of win-win cooperation, the right of every nation to have autonomous control, sovereign control of their resources and destinies. And people could say, oh, yeah, but they're imposing the Communist Party, the communist machine onto all of the countries working with the BRI. And it's like, no, name me one. I've had people who actually wrote to me last time I said this on the show a few weeks ago. Somebody wrote to me saying, yeah, but Taiwan and Hong Kong, they're imposing communism about Taiwan and Hong Kong. And it's like, yeah, they're part of China. They're not other countries. Every other one of the 135 countries, on the one hand, are free to do their own thing. They're not being imposed. They're being provided the means to develop their own economies with the Belt and Road, massive infrastructure projects. And number two, it's not even communism. Like, if you actually look at what this thing is, they got more private enterprise in China these days than the rest of the world. You have a state-run centralized command. That's true, but you also have a lot of rich people. You have a lot of inventions, a lot of patents. More patents are being discovered right now or registered for in China than even in the United States.
Highest per capita of women billionaires in the world. Women billionaires.
There you go. My God, right?
Okay.
Like, Yeah, and on top of that, you have sovereign banking, right? The only place where private central banking has not taken hold is in China. That's the only place that, the first place that Soros was kicked out of in 1989 was China. They got rid of the open societies. They shut all that down. They kept a division between commercial banking and investment banking in China. That's the only place Glass-Steagall still exists. That's why they're able to get reliable long-term credit at low interest for big projects. That's why they can build a skyscraper in a day where it takes us 5 years or more, So it's something the U.S. used to actually do. If you look at how Lincoln organized the Transcontinental Railway, or how FDR organized the Tennessee Valley Authority, or the rural electrification, or a lot of these things, or JFK organized the national direction given to building the hydroelectric dams, or the space program. The point of government is to both defend the general welfare, the good of the whole, at the same time as the inalienable rights of the individual. Now, I'll admit, China has a way to go on the aspect of the inalienable rights of the individual. It's not a democracy. Okay, there's democratic institutions or elements, but everything is a process of change. You're either changing towards getting better or getting a lot worse. And I got to tell you, when you look at every measurable thing that you could use to judge which direction Eurasia is going versus the USA, Canada, and the North American basket case, or the North Atlantic Alliance basket case.
We're ascending, Matthew, to the highest levels of wokeness.
Yeah, right. We're ascending beyond any domain where truth and reason exists. It's great. What a great utopia where you don't have to feel bad about lying because there's no such thing as truth. It's just
exactly nothing exists anymore. There's no such thing as truth. There's no right or wrong. There's no male or female.
True liberty.
Wonderful world. I mean, I'm liberated as a liberated man. I am so liberated. I'm so free. It's great.
But this is gets at the other epistemological aspect of warfare, right? Because British epistemological warfare, I didn't really touch on that so much, but Ben Franklin is constantly waging this fight because liberalism is really what you had coming out of the British Enlightenment. The materialists, people like John Locke, or Adam Smith, who, by the way, we're told this is the garbage this is how good the British are. The British Empire is so good that they've been able to convince generation after generation of Americans that the imperial British thinkers who hated everything that the American cause stood for are the inspiration for the U.S. Revolution. They're told John Locke and his theories gave rise to the American Revolution. No, John Locke gave rise to the Constitution of North Carolina that embedded slavery and the right to property, as primal, but he was also on the Board of Trade of Britain that kept the colonies legally underdeveloped by banning any rights of the colonies to have manufacturing. That was John Locke, who ran the report that banned manufacturing in the Americas. He was on the British, he was a shareholder of the British Royal Africa Company.
Yep.
That brought in 6 million slaves between 1708 and 1776. That wasn't an American thing. The Americans were always fighting against that. The British were the ones pushing a slave economy onto the United States. And John Locke, the guy who doesn't believe in the soul, who says we're just blank slates to be written on by a master class, his ideas of freedom are all rooted in that assumption. That guy didn't give rise to anything good, and neither did Adam Smith, who, by the way, wrote his he's another British liberal who doesn't believe in truth, because you're like, whatever goes. Don't regulate the economy. Don't have direction. Don't have intention. Don't have ideas that govern economy or value. That's tyranny. Adam Smith says in 1776, which is the year of the Revolution, which is not a coincidence because that book was written on commission by Lord Shelburne, the guy who runs British intelligence. A few years earlier, he commissions this book to be written in order to justify why colonies, especially rebellious ones, should not develop manufacturing. And the idea is if you have a lot of agricultural land, then you're going to get more money doing that by buying low and selling dear and just selling what you're good at. And invisible hands will self-regulate magically the marketplace, but you just have to, no protectionism, no regulation, just liberally let it be. Because and so this is the thinking, which people again are told is American. It's not. That's part of the British mental rape on America, on American people, generation after generation. You got to read Ben Franklin to actually get what gave rise to this idea. There's other beautiful thinkers that really did inspire the revolution, and it's not them. It's not Smith or Locke. It's people like Leibniz. If you read go to the Schiller Institute is a good resource that I recommend people check out. You guys perform their conferences a lot. There's a lot of good research on that website going through this history really nicely.
It's incredible. It really is incredible, man.
Yeah,
unreal.
Totally.
Matthew Ehret, the scholar, the mind, and the gentleman himself. He is here with us, folks. And again, you can check out Matthew's work over at his Substack, and also check out CanadianPatriot.com and the RisingTideFoundation.net. A plethora, a wellspring, a smorgasbord of information, of documents, of historical analysis. Folks, you got to go there. Get yourself an education. Learn how the whole damn thing works. It's all complexities. It's not about, one group is this way and everybody in that group thinks the same. No, it's not that. Stop thinking binary. Hey, man, I always want to do this, right? I want to get the guy who thinks it's like everything's a Masonic conspiracy.
Yeah.
I want to get him versus the guy who thinks it's a complete Catholic conspiracy versus the guy who thinks it's a Jewish conspiracy. And I'm going to have them all fight it out. To see who wins.
Oh, man. No, you know what it is? Well, yeah, pay-per-view? Yeah, right.
My money's on the Jew hater.
Oh, man. Well, that's the thing with these. It's like there's these little. What I've noticed is that the British technique, and I shouldn't say British because it's an imperial oligarchical technique. They're really good at synthetic cult creation. They're able to create local, internally consistent ideologies that profess to explain something macro, something beyond the senses. And that's good. Like human beings, unlike animals, we can do that. Animals don't do that. They adapt to whatever, environment you put them in. And that's animals. It's fine for them. Human beings generate concepts. We're a concept-driven species, and we can perfect our concepts, or we can act foolishly. We can not self-examine our thoughts as we're making them. And when that happens, we can get a lot of fallacies and cloudy stupidity to govern our convictions, because the thought shapes a conviction, which shapes our actions, which shapes our identity, which shapes how we situate ourselves in a process, right? And that's what it's always about. It's self-conscious identity formation. That's the nature of epistemological warfare. And you'll find that even when you look back at a lot of the Jewish conspiracy literature, and yes, I mean, there are Jews. Yes, that is true. You'll find Jewish names in banking families that played nefarious roles in processes historically. The Rothschilds are a thing. The Montefiore family is a thing. You'll find others. The Bronfmans are a thing. But you got to, if you just try to find a formula, some math, like this equals this, this is the cause of all evil, whether it's Masonic, whether it's Jews, whether it's Catholic conspiracy or whatever. You can pick your flavor, right? Hybrid aliens, shapeshifting, lizards, whatever. As soon as you have that, you could then apply your formula to everything, and you'll feel like this is explaining everything. And you feel more strongly and strongly about it, and it becomes a blind ideology, and you start ignoring all of the evidence that doesn't fit with your formula. Computers do that, right? That you plug in a computer and it can only find what it's programmed to find.
Correct.
Evidence outside of the programming doesn't exist for the computer. Correct. And that's what people who are treated like blank slates, they're kind of like computers. You could program them. That's why the empire likes John Locke. They don't like Leibniz. Yep. So I think that if you actually look at it, though, you always self-examine. You think, okay, here's my hypothesis. It may be it's founded on some good principles, but maybe there's things I don't know. And you're always self-examining your thoughts. Then you're not 100%. So inclined to be trapped into one of these synthetic cults.
Unfortunately, the problem is the majority of people are. Majority of people are binary thinkers. Majority of people are sheep. Majority of people need to be led. Majority of people don't do any sort of real critical thinking. They lack the capacity, and that's fine. It is what it is. But do some damn reading for once. It is what it is, man. But the example that I like to give is I've always said this. The global conspiracy, I liken it to Murder on the Orient Express, the famous novel with Monsieur Poirot, with Hercule Poirot, right? The famous detective. He was on the Orient Express, trying to find out who killed the guy, right? The victim in this caper who was murdered on the train, And he started interviewing everybody on the train. He found out that
It's everybody.
everybody had a motive to kill him.
Right. No, it kind of, yeah, exactly. Yeah, there's an element of truth. That's how a lie is propitiated, because there's an element of truthfulness in every lie which is successful. Otherwise, it would be something that the mind doesn't take in if there wasn't elements of truth. So, yeah, you just have to. That's a good. The Poirot example is a good one. And I would just say here, like before, I know we've gone on longer than our strategic hour implies in the title, but I would just say this coming week, people who've been watching this regularly know that I curate with my wife weekly classes on history and science and everything. So this week we have coming up this Sunday afternoon a class on the Pan-African movement. Shikant Diop will be explored, what he was doing to create an African Renaissance in the 20th century. Other Pan-African leaders who were inspired by the best of the United States are going to be also looked at. We got a class the week afterwards on the Bandung Conference that established a China, India, Africa design in the 1950s for the 5 principles of peaceful coexistence, and a lot more is going to come up. So if anybody wants to be on these things live, they just need to write to info@risingtidefoundation.net. That's info@risingtidefoundation.net. Send an email. I'll send you the Zoom link, and you could just take part, learn, ask a question. Good. It's good for the mind.
Absolutely, and we'll have that also in the description box.
Sweet.
Folks, thank you for listening in. Again, the man is Matthew Ehret. Go check out his website. The links will be in the description box. And thank you all for joining us. Subscribe, like, comment, and share. And with that being said, El Cuco, take it away.